New York AP. Three daughters of Malcolm X have accused the CIA, FBI, the New York Police Department and others in a $100 million lawsuit Friday of playing roles in the 1965 assassination of the civil rights leader. In the lawsuit filed in Manhattan federal court, the daughters, along with the Malcolm X estate, claimed that the agencies were aware of and were involved in the assassination plot and failed to stop the killing. At a morning news conference, attorney Ben Crump stood with family members as he described the lawsuit, saying he hoped federal and city officials would read it and learn all the dastardly deeds that were done by their predecessors and try to right these historic wrongs. The NYPD and CIA did not immediately respond to requests for comment. Nicholas Biasi, a spokesperson for the Department of Justice, which was also sued, declined comment. The FBI said in an email that it was its standard practice not to comment on litigation. For decades, more questions than answers have arisen over who was to blame for the death of Malcolm X, who was 39 years old when he was slain on February 21, 1965, at the Audubon Ballroom on West 165th Street in Manhattan as he spoke to several hundred people. Born Malcolm Little in Omaha, Nebraska, Malcolm X later changed his name to El Haj Malik El-Shabazz. 3 men were convicted of crimes in the death, but 2 of them were exonerated in 2021 after investigators took a fresh look at the case and concluded some evidence was shaky and authorities had held back some information. In the lawsuit, the family said the prosecution team suppressed the government's role in the assassination. The lawsuit alleges that there was a corrupt, unlawful, and unconstitutional relationship between law enforcement and ruthless killers that went unchecked for many years and was actively concealed, condoned, protected, and facilitated by government agents, leading up to the murder of Malcolm X. According to the lawsuit, the NYPD, coordinating with federal law enforcement agencies, arrested the activist security detail days before the assassination and intentionally removed their officers from inside the ballroom where Malcolm X was killed. Meanwhile, it adds, federal agencies had personnel, including undercover agents, in the ballroom but failed to protect him. The lawsuit was not brought sooner because the defendants withheld information from the family, including the identities of undercover informants, agents and provocateurs, and what they knew about the planning that preceded the attack. Malcolm X's wife, Betty Shabazz, the plaintiffs, and their entire family have suffered the pain of the unknown for decades, the lawsuit states. They did not know who murdered Malcolm X, why he was murdered, the level of NYPD, FBI and CIA orchestration, the identity of the governmental agents who conspired to ensure his demise, or who fraudulently covered up their role, it states. The damage caused to the Shabazz family is unimaginable, immense, and irreparable. The family announced its intention to sue the law enforcement agencies early last year.
Yes, Malcolm X's family has announced plans to sue various government agencies, including the CIA and FBI, for allegedly concealing evidence related to his assassination. They claim new evidence has come to light, which they believe points to a conspiracy involving these agencies. It's a significant development in the ongoing quest for clarity and justice regarding Malcolm X's death. Malcolm X's daughters are filing a lawsuit against the CIA, FBI, NYPD, and others, alleging that these agencies conspired in his assassination and fraudulently concealed evidence. This action comes decades after Malcolm X was killed in 1965 while speaking at the Audubon Ballroom in New York City. Although 3 men were convicted for his murder, questions have lingered about who was actually responsible. Recently, 2 of the convicted men were exonerated after an investigation found that evidence was withheld during their trial. This lawsuit by Malcolm X's family seeks accountability and transparency regarding the circumstances of his death. The lawsuit from Malcolm X's family is based on their belief that government agencies played a role in his assassination and then covered up their involvement. This follows years of questions surrounding his death in 1965 at the Audubon Ballroom in New York. Recently, 2 men convicted for his murder were exonerated as investigations revealed withheld evidence. The family believes these agencies were part of a conspiracy and want accountability and transparency. Malcolm X was assassinated on February 21, 1965, while addressing his Organization of Afro-American Unity at the Audubon Ballroom in Harlem. 3 men were arrested and convicted, Talmadge Hayer, also known as Thomas Hagen, Norman 3X Butler, later known as Muhammad Abdulaziz, and Thomas 15X Johnson, later Khalil Islam. Hayer admitted involvement, but maintained that Butler and Johnson were innocent. Decades later, an investigation led to the exoneration of Aziz and Islam in 2021, after it was revealed that evidence pointing to their innocence had been suppressed. Malcolm X's family now alleges that government agencies played a role in orchestrating his murder. They highlight newly uncovered evidence suggesting a broader conspiracy, and the lawsuit seeks to hold these agencies accountable for their alleged role and subsequent cover-up. Malcolm X's assassination happened during a period of intense political and social upheaval. He had recently broken away from the Nation of Islam, which created significant tension between him and the organization. At the time, Malcolm was a powerful voice advocating for Black liberation, self-determination, and human rights, which made him a target of surveillance by government agencies like the FBI under their COINTELPRO program. This program aimed to neutralize leaders deemed threats to national security, including civil rights figures like Malcolm X. The family's lawsuit builds on long-standing suspicions that these agencies not only surveilled Malcolm, but actively worked to undermine him and may have facilitated his murder. For years, many historians and activists have speculated that the FBI and NYPD had informants within Malcolm's circle and possibly withheld information that could have prevented his death. In 2021, the release of a letter from a former NYPD officer, Raymond Wood, added fuel to these claims. Wood alleged that he was coerced into actions that contributed to Malcolm's vulnerability, such as arresting his security team days before the assassination. This letter and other revelations are key pieces of evidence the family is using to support their case. Malcolm X's assassination remains one of the most controversial events in American history. At the time of his death, he was becoming a global figure, advocating for Black empowerment and connecting struggles for liberation worldwide. This made him a target of intense surveillance and hostility from both the Nation of Islam and government agencies like the FBI and NYPD. The lawsuit by his family hinges on allegations that these agencies played a direct or indirect role in his death. Key to their claim is evidence like the letter from former NYPD officer Raymond Wood, who said he was pressured to weaken Malcolm's security, coupled with the revelation that critical evidence was withheld during the trials of those initially convicted. The case highlights long-standing suspicions of foul play and institutional conspiracy. Malcolm X's daughters say their goal is accountability, not just for justice for their father, but to expose the systems that may have worked to silence him. They're seeking clarity on whether the government actively facilitated or turned a blind eye to his murder, which continues to shape the legacy of activism and civil rights struggles today. At the time of his assassination, Malcolm X had become a transformative leader, expanding his message from the Nation of Islam's teachings to a broader vision of human rights and global solidarity. This evolution, including his founding of the Organization of Afro-American Unity, threatened powerful entities. His critiques of systemic racism, imperialism, and the Nation of Islam leadership marked him as a target. The FBI's COINTELPRO program monitored Malcolm heavily, aiming to disrupt his efforts. Declassified documents have shown how the program sought to sow distrust, weaken alliances, and neutralize influential Black leaders. NYPD surveillance also extended to Malcolm's inner circle, which likely left him vulnerable at critical moments. On the day of his death, Malcolm had little security. His usual detail had been disrupted. The Audubon Ballroom attack involved 3 gunmen, with Talmadge Hayer admitting guilt while insisting that Norman 3X Butler and Thomas 15X Johnson were innocent. Decades later, evidence emerged showing that law enforcement agencies had information that could have exonerated these men, but failed to disclose it. The family's lawsuit reflects a desire not only for justice, but also for transparency about systemic forces that targeted Malcolm and other civil rights leaders. They hope this legal effort will bring long-hidden truths to light, forcing a reckoning with how institutional racism influenced his assassination. It's long been suspected that Malcolm X's assassination involved more than just internal disputes within the Nation of Islam. Activists and scholars have pointed to the intense surveillance and manipulation by government programs like COINTELPRO, which aimed to disrupt Black liberation movements. These suspicions grew stronger with revelations of suppressed evidence, informants, and the questionable handling of Malcolm's security on the day of his death. For many, the recent exonerations and the family's lawsuit are steps toward uncovering the full truth, shining a light on the broader systems that may have conspired to silence one of the most powerful voices of his time. The context of Malcolm X's assassination involves a web of tensions, personal, organizational, and systemic. After splitting from the Nation of Islam in 1964, Malcolm faced hostility not only from within the group, but also from external forces that viewed him as a threat. His growing independence and global alliances with African and Middle Eastern leaders deepened concerns among U.S. intelligence agencies. Malcolm's shift toward human rights, rather than just civil rights, was seen as a challenge to American authority on the world stage. The FBI and NYPD closely monitored Malcolm. Under COINTELPRO, the FBI targeted Black leaders to prevent the rise of a Black Messiah, someone capable of unifying and mobilizing Black communities. Informants were placed in Malcolm's organization, and communications were intercepted. The NYPD had a unit, the Bureau of Special Services, BOS, specifically tasked with surveilling Black activists, including Malcolm. On the day of his assassination, February 21st, 1965, several suspicious factors were at play. Malcolm's security was unusually light, and key members of his team were absent, possibly due to external pressures. The Audubon Ballroom was packed with over 400 people when the attack occurred. But accounts suggest that law enforcement's presence and response were limited despite prior threats to his life. The exoneration of Muhammad Abdulaziz and Khalil Islam in 2021 revealed that key evidence had been suppressed during their trial. This included FBI documents and witness testimony that pointed to their innocence. The letter from NYPD officer Raymond Wood further suggested that law enforcement actively worked to destabilize Malcolm's security leading up to the event. For Malcolm's family, the lawsuit against federal and city agencies represents a critical step in uncovering the truth. They believe that government complicity or negligence played a role in his death and aim to hold these entities accountable for the long-standing injustice. This effort is part of a broader call to re-examine how systemic racism and state power have intersected to undermine Black leaders throughout history. Malcolm X's assassination is a deeply symbolic moment in the history of the civil rights movement, marked by unresolved questions and tensions that resonate to this day. His transition from a spokesperson for the Nation of Islam to an independent global advocate for human rights made him a polarizing figure. His critiques of systemic oppression in the United States, coupled with his willingness to connect the struggles of African Americans to those of oppressed people worldwide, made him a target for powerful interests. In the weeks leading up to his death, Malcolm received numerous death threats. He was also aware of infiltrators within his ranks, sowing division and distrust. His home was firebombed a week before his assassination, an act that underscored the imminent danger he faced. Yet, despite this, he continued to speak out, driven by a sense of mission and urgency to inspire change. On February 21st, 1965, as Malcolm addressed the crowd at the Audubon Ballroom, gunmen opened fire, killing him in front of his family and supporters. Eyewitness accounts and the subsequent investigation were fraught with inconsistencies. The convictions of Talmadge Hayer, Norman 3X Butler, and Thomas 15X Johnson were based on questionable evidence, and Hayer himself testified that Butler and Johnson were innocent. This left lingering doubts about the true identities of the perpetrators and the forces behind the attack. The systemic involvement has come into sharper focus over the years. Declassified FBI documents revealed extensive surveillance of Malcolm and efforts to undermine his influence. The NYPD's BOSS unit had infiltrators within Malcolm's organizations, but the full extent of their knowledge or involvement in the assassination remains unclear. The letter from Officer Raymond Wood, released in 2021, claimed he was coerced into actions that compromised Malcolm's safety, adding weight to allegations of official complicity. The family's current lawsuit seeks not only justice for Malcolm, but also transparency from agencies that have long withheld information. For his daughters, this is about preserving their father's legacy and uncovering the truth about how institutional racism and state power may have conspired to silence him. They hope this effort will set a precedent for holding institutions accountable for actions that have long-lasting impacts on social justice movements. Yes, Malcolm X was heavily monitored by the FBI and was on their watch list due to his growing influence as a leader in the fight for Black liberation. Through the COINTELPRO program, the FBI sought to disrupt and neutralize individuals and groups they considered a threat to national security. Malcolm's speeches, international connections, and evolving ideology made him a key figure of concern. The FBI tracked Malcolm's activities, intercepted communications, and maintained detailed files on him. They labeled him a potential threat because of his ability to inspire and mobilize people, as well as his critiques of systemic racism in the United States. The FBI also worked to sow discord between Malcolm and the Nation of Islam, and they infiltrated his organizations with informants. These tactics were part of a broader effort to undermine civil rights leaders and movements during that era. Malcolm was acutely aware of the surveillance, often referencing it in his speeches. He saw it as a sign of his effectiveness and the power of his message, but it also contributed to the paranoia and tension in his final months. Many believed the FBI's actions not only destabilized Malcolm's efforts, but also left him vulnerable to the attack that ended his life. The FBI's surveillance of Malcolm X was extensive and deeply rooted in its COINTELPRO strategy, which aimed to prevent the rise of a Black Messiah who could unite and galvanize African Americans. This program targeted many leaders of the civil rights and Black Power movements, including Martin Luther King Jr., the Black Panther Party, and Malcolm X. Malcolm X became a key figure of interest as his influence grew within the Nation of Islam and later as an independent leader. The FBI maintained detailed files on him, documenting his speeches, travels, and associations. Informants were planted within his organizations, including the Nation of Islam and his later group, the Organization of Afro-American Unity, OAAU. These informants provided the FBI with information about internal tensions, plans, and Malcolm's movements. One of the more sinister tactics employed by the FBI was fomenting distrust and division within the Nation of Islam, particularly between Malcolm and Elijah Muhammad, the group's leader. By exploiting these tensions, the FBI hoped to weaken the organization and, by extension, Malcolm's influence. After Malcolm's departure from the Nation of Islam, the FBI intensified its efforts to monitor and destabilize his activities. Declassified FBI documents have revealed the extent of this surveillance. For instance, agents were aware of credible threats to Malcolm's life, but took no action to protect him. Some of these threats came from Nation of Islam members who viewed Malcolm as a traitor, while others remain less clearly attributed. Malcolm himself was acutely aware of the FBI's watchful eye, often pointing out their presence at his speeches and noting how his phones were tapped. He even predicted his own assassination, knowing that both internal and external forces were aligning against him. His assassination on February 21st, 1965, has long been seen as the culmination of these intersecting pressures from the Nation of Islam, law enforcement, and federal intelligence agencies. The FBI's role in creating the conditions that led to Malcolm's assassination remains a subject of ongoing investigation and debate. The family's current lawsuit aims to uncover whether the FBI, along with other government entities like the NYPD, played an active role in facilitating or allowing the assassination to occur. These questions are part of a broader reckoning with the systemic efforts to undermine Black leaders during the civil rights era. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe for more content, and leave a comment below. See you next time.